A dam in southern China just split open. At about 11 in the morning, two sections of the Liulan Reservoir gave way at once, tearing a breach roughly 50 meters wide through an earthen wall that had held its water back for 66 years. And it failed on the first day the reservoir behind it ever climbed past the level it was designed to hold. In a single moment, the water that wall was built to contain was set loose on the 170,000 people living downstream. For decades, that dam had been treated as solid ground. Homes were built below it, and a paved road ran straight across its crest. But a full year before it broke, a video already showed the cracks spreading. What inspectors know about the inside of that wall changes the whole story. And it points directly at roughly 30,000 more dams across China that were built the same way. But first, the morning the water came, Ding Wei, the vice mayor of Nanning, later stood at a news briefing and confirmed the figure the region had feared. 26 people killed by the breach alone, and 7 still missing. The dam sits in Hengzhou, on the edge of Nanning, in the Guangxi region of southern China. The rain that broke it came from Typhoon Maysak, which had already made one landfall and then curved back to strike Guangxi a second time before weakening into a tropical storm. It did not weaken fast enough. The Ministry of Water Resources had warned that parts of Guangxi could take 80 to 190 millimeters of rain between the 5th and the 7th of July, with some areas reaching 400. The real totals blew past that. Across cities including Nanning, Guigang, Qinzhou, and Fengchenggang, cumulative rainfall pushed past 600 millimeters, and in the hardest hit pockets, it topped 900. Most of a year's rain falling in a matter of days, the response escalated with the water. China upgraded its flood control emergency response for the whole of Guangxi to level 2, and Nanning raised its own footing to level 1, the highest tier the system has. The Ministry of Emergency Management pulled the China Meteorological Administration and the Ministries of Water Resources, Natural Resources, Housing, and Transport onto the same operation. On paper, the machine was moving. On the ground, the reservoirs were already losing. By the 6th of July, the warnings had hardened into orders. Nanning had climbed to its highest alert level, downstream villages were being told to move, and the emergency apparatus was fully engaged. But an aging earthen dam does not fail on a schedule that lines up neatly with an evacuation. When the two sections of Liulan let go the following morning, the water did not wait for the last resident to leave. And the gap between the alert on paper and the wall in the ground is exactly where most of the 26 deaths happened. The forecast had been close to right. The wall simply failed faster than the plan could empty the ground below it. Here's how the breach actually unfolded. As the rain kept coming, the water level inside Liulan Reservoir rose past its design capacity. The maximum the dam was ever engineered to hold. The outlets built to release water safely could not move it fast enough. So the reservoir did the one thing an earthen dam cannot survive. It let the water climb over and soak into the wall itself. A packed earth dam saturated from the top is a dam being eaten from the inside. At around 11 that Monday morning, two sections let go and the 50-meter gap opened. Early counts that evening put the immediate area at 55,000 people affected and 48,000 evacuated, with 6 confirmed dead and 11 missing. Those were the first numbers. They did not stay small, and Liulan was not alone. Across the Nanning region, Typhoon Maysak pushed 3 reservoirs into overtopping and forced breaches at 2 of them. Liulan and the Yunbiao Reservoir, both in Hengzhou, overtopped and breached. The Liuang Reservoir in Binyang County overtopped as well. The flooding cut a cross-border railway line, halting service. Region-wide, the water reached about 375,000 people, and roughly 130,000 were evacuated. Rescue crews put thousands of boats and a fleet of drones into the air and water to reach families cut off by the flood. But the worst detail is not in the rainfall totals. It is in the age of the wall. The core of the Liulan Dam was built in 1958, an earthen embankment from a very different era of engineering. And according to reporting by Probe International, the warning had already arrived. In June of 2025, a full year before Maysak, a video posted online showed visible subsidence and cracking on a road that had recently been renovated across the top of the dam. The surface had been dressed up. The body underneath, sources say, had never been properly reinforced. Probe International summed it up in a single line, that the typhoon exposed decades of neglect after a 66-year-old dam collapsed. When the water finally came, the crest that people drove across every day was already failing beneath the fresh pavement. The people who lived below it have not accepted the official account. Survivors quoted by Vision Times called the collapse a man-made disaster, not a natural one, and disputed the death toll outright, saying entire clusters of elderly residents and children vanished within minutes as the water arrived, and putting the true number far higher than the official figure. That claim cannot be independently confirmed, and it is not being stated here as fact, but it is the accusation now hanging over the wreckage, and it is the reason this story did not end when the water drained. Because the question it raises is much larger than one reservoir in Guangxi. Here is the part that turns a local flood into a national one. China has more than 98,000 dams, one of the densest networks of dams on Earth, and at least 80% of them were built between the 1950s and the 1970s, many during a rapid construction push under Mao Zedong, using the standards and materials of that time. Liulan, built in 1958, is not an outlier in that system. It is a typical member of it, and there is a strange gap between the dams people fear and the dams that actually fail. Search interest and public dread cluster around the Three Gorges Dam, the largest dam on Earth, the structure that anchors most anxiety about Chinese infrastructure. But the Three Gorges is modern, monitored, and heavily engineered. The walls that actually break are the ones almost no one outside their own county can name. Small and mid-sized earthen reservoirs from the 1950s and 60s, holding back ordinary rivers above ordinary towns, inspected rarely and reinforced less. Liulan was one of those. So was every wall in that count of 30,000. The real danger in China's dam network is not concentrated in the one giant everyone watches. It is spread across tens of thousands of old walls almost no one is watching at all. The safety record of that older generation is documented, and it is not reassuring. The Ministry of Water Resources itself has stated that between 1954 and 2005, dikes collapsed at 3,486 reservoirs, failures tied to substandard construction and poor management. And the risk did not stay in the past. By one widely cited assessment, about 36% of China's dams, somewhere near 30,000 of them, are considered high risk from structural obsolescence or a simple lack of maintenance. That is the 30,000 more that this failure points to. Not a prediction of doom, but a real count of aging walls carrying the same weakness Liulan carried. The paperwork tells the same story. In a 2021 statement, the then Vice Minister of Water Resources acknowledged that more than 31,000 dams had not undergone their mandatory safety assessments within the required time frame. Tens of thousands of walls holding back water above towns and farmland, overdue for the one inspection meant to catch exactly the kind of hidden decay that opened Liulan. Reporting tied to those figures estimates that areas home to 130 million people or more sit in the path of flood-triggered disasters connected to this disrepair. And that backlog is not an abstraction. A mandatory safety assessment is the exact check meant to catch what failed at Liulan: the saturated core, the thin reinforcement, the crack hiding under fresh pavement. When more than 31,000 dams are overdue for that inspection, the country is effectively running tens of thousands of aging walls on trust. Liulan is what that trust looks like when it finally runs out on a rainy Monday morning. And this is not a danger built on a single old catastrophe. It has happened again, recently, and on camera. On the 18th of July, 2021, in the Hulanbuir area of Inner Mongolia, the Yongan Dam collapsed in the early afternoon after torrential rain. The water it released rushed 13 kilometers downstream into a second reservoir called Zinfa. And less than 2 hours later, that dam failed as well, one collapse feeding directly into the next. Around 46 million cubic meters of water were set loose. More than 16,500 residents were affected. 22 bridges and over 100 culverts were destroyed, and 15 kilometers of road were torn apart. The one thing that spared that region a death toll was timing. Residents were evacuated before the walls gave way. Liulan, 4 years later, did not get that same warning out in time. If that scale sounds abstract, China has already lived through the worst version of it. In 1975, the Bengkao Dam in Henan collapsed during an extreme storm, and the death toll from that single failure and the floods it unleashed is counted in the tens of thousands, by some estimates far higher. Bengkao is the reason dam safety in China is not a hypothetical fear. It is the historical benchmark that every crack in every old earthen wall is measured against. So what does the Liulan breach actually teach beyond the immediate loss? The mechanism was not exotic. It was rain exceeding what the reservoir could pass, water climbing over an aging earthen crest, and a structure that had been resurfaced on top, but not rebuilt underneath. Every piece of that was foreseeable, and at least one piece was filmed and posted a year in advance. The failure was not that the storm was unimaginable. Maysak was a known typhoon on a tracked path, with rainfall the Ministry of Water Resources had forecast in the right order of magnitude. The failure was that a wall from 1958 was carrying a load from 2026, and the inspection meant to check it was part of a backlog 31,000 entries long. That is the uncomfortable center of this story. The water in Guangxi has drained, the evacuees are counted, the railway will reopen, and the immediate emergency is over. But the condition that produced it, old dams, deferred assessments, and warnings that surface online long before they surface in any official notice, has not changed. Liulan was one wall out of tens of thousands, and it happened to be the one the rain found this year. The people downstream did nothing to earn that water. They lived where a dam was supposed to protect them, on ground that had held for 66 years, below a road that looked freshly repaired. The lesson of the breach is not that the sky failed them. It is that the wall did, quietly, for years, in plain sight, until a single morning of rain finished what neglect had started. And somewhere in that network of more than 98,000 dams, roughly 30,000 of them flagged as high risk, the same slow failure is already underway on a wall that is not broken yet. That is the real reason this story matters, long after the last boat leaves Hengzhou. Subscribe for the verified numbers on the next one, before the water arrives instead of after.